The cold light of distant stars glinted off the surface of Earth's most advanced space station, Sentinel-1. Inside the command hall, vast windows framed the endless blackness of space, where stars shimmered like silent watchers of a tense, unfolding drama. The Galactic Council's message had arrived hours ago, a diplomatic note, thin and brittle, that tried to warn humanity of consequences if they did not back down from recent border patrols near Council-controlled systems. But Earth's reply was swift and sharp, delivered without ceremony, a single phrase that echoed through every communication channel, causing ripples of shock across the galaxy: "We will not negotiate." Captain Mara Hale stood silently at the edge of the command room, her dark eyes reflecting the void beyond the glass. Around her, officers murmured nervously, exchanging worried glances. The council was used to politics, to drawn-out negotiations, to endless debates and subtle power plays. But Earth had never been a player in those games. Their message was clear, cold, final. It was a challenge wrapped in silence. It left the council unprepared. Across the galaxy, the great empires and ancient star nations gathered in their capital worlds. In glittering chambers and hidden war rooms, leaders debated the meaning of Earth's harsh stance. Was this a bluff, a show of strength meant to scare the council into backing down? Or was humanity truly ready to abandon diplomacy and march into war? In the midst of this uncertainty, the council's own capital, the shining city of Solara Prime, buzzed with activity. The High Chancellor, a tall figure with deep violet skin and piercing eyes, called an emergency session. His voice was firm but carried an edge of disbelief as he addressed the assembly of alien dignitaries. "Earth's silence after our message is a threat to galactic order," he declared. "We must respond, but with care. We must not allow this human recklessness to spark a war." But behind the polished speeches and diplomatic protocols, fear lurked like a shadow. For the first time in centuries, the Council faced an unknown species that ignored their warnings and crossed lines no one dared challenge. They knew Earth's history of surviving brutal wars on a harsh, unforgiving planet. They knew humanity had strength born of struggle, but they still underestimated the price Earth was willing to pay. Just as the debate reached fever pitch, alarms blared throughout Solara Prime's starport. The Council's command center flickered. With urgent messages, a human warship had appeared on the outskirts of the Council's core systems, announced, uninvited and moving fast. The ship was unlike any the galaxy had seen before, sleek black, with weapon systems that shimmered with deadly promise. No identification codes, no requests for docking, just presence. The Council's envoys scrambled, their previous confidence shattered. The High Chancellor's face tightened as he issued the order. "Contact the ship. Demand identification. Prepare defense." In the silence of space, the lone human warship advanced steadily, ignoring every hail and challenge. On board, Captain Mara Hale stood in the control room, her expression calm but resolute. Her ship was a message in itself. Humanity was no longer willing to negotiate behind closed doors. They were here, and they were ready. Back on Earth, the people watched the unfolding events through their own secure channels. For them, the arrival of the ship was not a threat but a promise that diplomacy had been tried and failed, a promise that their survival demanded strength beyond words. The past horrors, decades of attacks, loss, and betrayal, had forged a resolve that no galaxy could break. As the human ship crossed into Council space, tension stretched tight across star systems. No one knew what would come next. War? Peace? Something no one had predicted. But one thing was clear: the age of quiet diplomacy was over. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy would listen one way or another. The black silhouette of the human warship drifted through the vast emptiness of space, stark contrast against the glittering stars of the Galactic Council's domain. It moved without haste, but with a firm determination, crossing boundary after boundary without a hint of hesitation. This was no ordinary visit. It was a bold statement, one that echoed louder than any words could carry. Inside the Council's capital world, Solara Prime, panic and confusion spread quickly through the command centers. The Council's military commanders scrambled to make sense of the human warship's unexpected arrival. It was as if a ghost had appeared, refusing to vanish when ordered. Every communication attempt was met with silence. No messages, no demands, no explanations. It's just the ship, moving steadily closer to the heart of the Council's power. High Chancellor Rin Vash stood at the head of the Council's war room, staring at the holographic display that showed the human vessel inching toward Solara Prime, his fingers clenched tightly. The calm facade he maintained in public melted away in private. "Who are these humans?" he asked quietly. "What do they want? And why do they refuse to speak?" The Council's best diplomats and commanders worked frantically, sending envoy ships, broadcasting peaceful messages, even issuing warnings backed by the threat of force. But the human ship ignored them all. It was a silent arrival, a quiet challenge to the entire galaxy. On board the warship, Captain Mara Hale moved with purpose. The ship's corridors hummed softly with the energy of advanced technology. No alarms sounded, no unnecessary movements distracted the crew. They were ready, but calm. Their mission was clear: make the Council understand that Earth's patience had ended, that silence was a weapon more deadly than any gun. Mara walked to the main communication deck, her face set in a mask of quiet determination. The ship's AI awaited her commands, prepared to respond instantly to any threat, but instructed to avoid unnecessary provocation. "We don't start this war," Mara whispered. "We only end what should have never begun." The Council's forces began to scramble their fleets, moving warships into defensive positions around Solara Prime. The galaxy's greatest powers watched anxiously. It's uncertain whether this silent arrival would spark an all-out war or a new, dangerous form of diplomacy. Whispers echoed through council chambers and public forums. Some called for immediate attack, viewing the human ship as a declaration of war. Others urged caution, fearing that rash action would only bring destruction. The galaxy was divided, watching a silent warship that refused to speak, but said everything. For days, the human warship maintained its position just outside the capital world's orbit. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It simply waited, a dark sentinel in the void. On Solara Prime, the tension built like a storm ready to break. Every ship in the fleet was on alert. Every diplomat prepared for the worst, inside the warship's command room. Mara studied the stars and the distant blue-green planet below. She thought of Earth's history, the wars, the betrayals, the hard lessons learned on a planet that demanded strength and endurance. This mission was more than a show of force. It was a message that humanity's era had begun. The silence stretched on, heavy and full of meaning. The Council's attempts at communication had failed. The galaxy waited, unsure if the next move would come from Earth or from the trembling hands of those who feared what humanity represented. In the cold darkness of space, a new chapter was unfolding, one written not in words but in actions. The human warship remained silent, its presence speaking louder than any speech ever could. The grand hall of the Galactic Council was filled with tension thicker than the air of the oldest spaceport. Alien delegates from countless star systems sat in uneasy silence, their eyes fixed on the empty space where Earth's representatives were expected to appear. The council chambers, once a place of hope and negotiation, had become a battleground of frustration and fear. The attempts at diplomacy had failed, and no one knew what would come next. After days of silence, a single transmission flickered across the council's secure channels. The message was brief, cold, and full of warning. "We have tried peace. Now we prepare for survival." There was no apology, no soft words, only the hard truth of humanity's resolve. It was a declaration. It struck the council like a hammer. High Chancellor Rin Vash slammed his fist against the polished surface of the conference table. "This is not negotiation," he growled. "They refuse to speak with us. They refuse to bend. We must consider other options." Among the delegates, murmurs turned into heated arguments. Some urged caution, fearing that pushing humanity too hard would lead to a all-out war. Others demanded a strong response, convinced that the only way to deal with Earth was through force. The divide was sharp, fracturing the Council's unity. Meanwhile, aboard the human warship, Captain Mara Hale watched the galaxy's reactions with a cool but burning fire inside. Earth had sent envoys before. Earth had tried diplomacy. But the galaxy's long history of lies, betrayals, and attacks against human colonies had worn down any trust. The time for talks was over. The time for action had come. Mara's officers prepared battle plans, not for conquest, but for defense and precision strikes. They knew Earth did not seek war for power, but for survival and justice. Every mission, every strike would be calculated to end threats swiftly and limit unnecessary harm. Back in the council chambers, secret meetings took place away from public view. Factions plotted alliances and counter-strategies. Now, the Empire's oldest warrior faction demanded full mobilization. Spies reported unusual activity near Earth's borders. The galaxy's greatest powers were preparing for war. Despite the mounting tension, a few voices called for patience. "Perhaps we misread them," whispered an elder delegate from the ocean world of Falar. "Humanity's silence may be a challenge to see if we will change. We must try once more before war consumes us all." But those hopes were fragile, overshadowed by the harsh reality. Earth's next moves would decide the fate of the galaxy. The weeks stretched and the silent standoff grew colder. Ships on both sides remained alert, ready for the spark that could ignite the war no one wanted but few could avoid. In quiet moments, Captain Mara stood before the starfield thinking of what had been lost and what was at stake. Failed humanity's chance for peace. Now humanity's resolve was the only answer left. The stage was set. The fragile hope of diplomacy was broken. The war that would shape the stars was about to begin. The tension that had gripped the galaxy. 4 weeks finally broke in a burst of fire and smoke. The silence that had hung over the vastness of space shattered like glass as the first shots were fired near the neutral planet Veralia. A world caught between the power struggles of the Galactic Council and Earth's growing might. It was supposed to be a peaceful zone, a place where no warships dared to enter. But now, it became the stage for the first violent clash. The Council fleet, massive and imposing, moved swiftly to intercept the lone human warship patrolling near Verelia's orbit. The commanders of the Council believed that a show of strength would force the humans to back down. They underestimated the quiet confidence behind Earth's soldiers. On the bridge of the human warship Eclipse, Captain Mara Hale watched the approaching enemy vessels. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, but inside, a storm raged. She knew that this moment would change everything. The decision to fight had not come lightly, but it was clear Earth would defend itself at all costs. The first warning shots flashed through space bright beams cutting through darkness, warning signals meant to stop the human ship. But the Eclipse did not retreat. It responded not with panic, but with precision. Its weapons activated, unleashing pulses of energy that disabled several Council ships without destroying them completely. It was a message. Earth was strong, but not cruel. The Council fleet reacted with surprise and anger. They moved to encircle the Eclipse, hoping to overwhelm it with numbers. Yet the human ship maneuvered like a shadow, slipping between enemy fire, striking where the enemy was weakest.
Battle was swift but fierce.
Each move calculated. Each shot meant to disable rather than kill indiscriminately. Back on Verelia, planet's inhabitants watched in terror as the space around. Their world turned into a deadly arena. Civilian alarms sounded and emergency shelters filled quickly. The first strike was not just a battle between fleets, it was a warning to the entire galaxy. War had truly begun. In the aftermath, both sides counted their losses. The Council had lost ships and prestige. Earth had shown it would not back down. The conflict that many feared had erupted with brutal clarity. There was no longer room for diplomacy. The quiet warning had turned into a roar. Captain Mara Hale sent a broadcast. Across Council channels, her voice steady and firm. "We seek no conquest. We fight only to protect what is ours. Let this battle remind the galaxy. Humanity does not bluff. As the eclipse slipped away from the battlefield, the galaxy was left to ponder a terrifying truth. Diplomacy had failed. The Council realized that humanity was not a force to negotiate with lightly. They were a force to fear. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The aftermath of the first battle near Veralia echoed across the galaxy like thunder after a sudden storm. The Galactic Council's halls were filled with whispered fears and urgent meetings. They faced a new reality. The humans were not just fighters. They were something else entirely. Their tactics baffled experienced commanders, their moves unpredictable and fierce. It was as if they fought by a code no one else understood, code born from hardship, survival, and an iron will to endure. Captain Mara Hale stood on the bridge of the eclipse, studying reports flooding in from the front lines. Human strike teams had been deployed on several contested worlds, using speed and precision to dismantle enemy operations before they could react. The Council's forces were shocked by the humans' ability to adapt quickly, strike with surgical accuracy, and disappear before a counterattack could form. Unlike other species, humans did not rely on brute force alone. They combined advanced technology with clever tactics and orthodox maneuvers that kept their enemies guessing and off balance. Mara knew this was the true strength of humanity, their ability to think differently, to innovate under pressure, to fight with heart as well as weapons. Earth's message broadcasted across the galaxy was clear and unyielding. We do not seek war, but we will defend ourselves with everything we have. No threat to our people will go unanswered. This warning carried a weight far heavier than any speech. It was a promise made by a people forged in fire. The Council's military strategists struggled to respond. Their traditional formations and tactics faltered against the fast, adaptive human attacks. Their fleets found themselves outmaneuvered, their defenses breached in unexpected places. Panic spread among some factions, while others doubled down on attempts to negotiate, though those talks remained cold and distant. Meanwhile, the humans did not celebrate their victories. On board the Eclipse, Captain Hale reminded her crew daily of the cost of war. "Every life lost is a tragedy," she said quietly during a briefing. "We fight not to conquer, but to protect our home and our future." Her words settled heavily on her team, reminding them of the fine line they walked between defense and destruction. Behind the scenes, Earth's leaders prepared for a long conflict. Resources were shifted, new ships built, and soldiers trained harder. But the message to the galaxy remained consistent. Diplomacy had failed, but humanity still hoped for peace if others chose the same path. As human forces advanced, the Council's leaders faced a difficult choice. Could they match Earth's resolve and strategy? Or were they doomed to watch their empires crumble under a power that refused to bluff? In the silent reaches of space, the war continued, not just with weapons, but with the stubborn will of two civilizations locked in a deadly dance. And through it all, humanity's true nature was revealed: resilient, clever, and unyielding. The Galactic Council's chambers were filled with restless voices, shadows cast by glowing star maps dancing on polished walls. The once united front was now fractured. Fear and doubt had taken root among the Council's greatest powers. The arrival of the human warship, followed by the sudden eruption of war, had shaken their confidence to its core. They faced a dilemma unlike any before: how to fight a foe that would not yield, that would not even speak, yet struck with deadly precision and cold resolve. High Chancellor Rinvosh sat in his private chambers, staring at the flickering images of battle reports. The numbers told a grim story: ships lost, worlds damaged, allies shaken. Yet what troubled him most was not the losses, but the unknown depths of humanity's will. Earth soldiers were not just fighters, they were warriors. With a code that the Council could not break or predict, it was a puzzle with deadly consequences. Across the galaxy, secret meetings convened. The Empire's military generals clashed with diplomats who still hoped for peace. The idea of a prolonged war sent ripples of panic through the Council's leadership. Resources were finite, and the longer the conflict dragged on, the more vulnerable they became. Some factions whispered of alliances with less scrupulous powers, willing to risk everything to stop Earth's advance. In the shadows, spies reported new human technologies being deployed: silent drones, new shields, weapons that seemed to anticipate enemy moves. The Council's scientists raced to understand these advancements, but the gap only seemed to widen. Humanity's ability to adapt was staggering, their resolve unbreakable. Amid this turmoil, some voices within the Council called for restraint. "We must find another way," pleaded an elder delegate from the planet Thalor. "Earth's power is great, but the galaxy cannot afford endless war. We need dialogue, not destruction." But others disagreed fiercely. "They have broken all rules," growled General Corrin, a veteran of countless wars. "They do not negotiate. They do not surrender. We must respond with strength, or we lose everything." Caught between these forces, High Chancellor Rinvosh felt the weight of his position more than ever. Every decision he made could tip the balance between survival and ruin. The Council was no longer united, it was divided, fragile and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Captain Mara Hale and her crew prepared for the next phase of their mission. Earth had no desire for conquest, but it would not hesitate to defend its people. Each strike was measured, each move purposeful. They knew the Council's weakness, indecision, and fear. As the war stretched on, the galaxy braced itself. The Council's dilemma was clear: negotiate with an enemy who would not negotiate, or fight a war that could destroy them all. The future hung in balance. And in the cold silence of space, only one thing was certain: humanity would not back down. The sky above the shattered moons of Zareth burned with the glow of distant battles. The air on the Council's remaining strongholds was thick with dread. Every hour brought new reports: more fleets disabled, more outposts lost, more signs that Earth's war machine was unstoppable. The Galactic Council, once the unchallenged authority across hundreds of star systems, now stood on the edge of collapse. Their enemies were not vast in number, they were not centuries old, but they fought with something the Council had never seen before: an unbreakable human resolve. Captain Mara Hale stood silently in the observation bay of the eclipse. Her eyes locked on the distant stars. The reflection of distant explosions flickered across the glass, painting her face with the cold fire of war. Behind her, the ship's officers moved with quiet precision, preparing for the next mission. The mood was calm, but beneath that calm ran the steel thread of determination. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Humanity had made its choice, and it would see this war to its end. The mission ahead was simple, but dangerous: a deep strike into the heart of the Council's last defensive line. Intelligence had revealed the location of key commanders who still clung to the hope of rallying their scattered fleets. If they could be captured or eliminated, the war would end swiftly. The Eclipse would lead the assault, backed by Earth's finest special operations teams. In the Council's war chambers, panic spread. The few remaining loyalists argued endlessly. Some pleaded for one last attempt at negotiation, but their words fell flat. The time for talk had passed. Others pushed for desperate retaliation, deploying ancient weapons or biological horrors long forbidden. The High Chancellor knew that such acts would not bring victory but total annihilation. Still, fear twisted his heart. He could no longer tell whether he feared humanity's ships or the cold silence that followed their every move. The assault began without warning. Human ships appeared like ghosts, bypassing defenses, striking with surgical precision. Elite human teams, wearing advanced armor and carrying weapons the Council had never seen, moved through enemy command centers with chilling efficiency. They didn't waste time. They didn't waste words. Every action was deliberate. Within hours, the Council's last defensive ring began to crumble. Communications faltered. Morale collapsed. The realization hit: this was not a war they could win. Humanity had no desire for conquest, but their will to survive, to protect their home, was beyond breaking. Even as they struck decisive blows, the humans showed restraint. Civilian populations were spared. Surrendering forces were allowed to retreat. Earth's message remained unchanged: we fight only to end the threat to our people. We seek no empire. We seek no blood. but we will not stand down. Captain Mara Hale returned to her command chair, watching the final stages of the mission unfold. Her voice was quiet, but her words carried the weight of the entire human race. We end this not with hatred, but with the strength we were forced to find. The Council's remaining leaders finally understood. Humanity did not bluff. Humanity did not bend. And now the galaxy itself would have to live with the new order rising from the ashes of failed diplomacy. The war that had shaken the stars finally reached its quiet end. Across the galaxy, burning skies faded to cold silence. Debris from shattered ships drifted through the darkness like forgotten ghosts. The Council's armies, once mighty and feared, now lay broken, their fleets scattered, their worlds scarred. And standing above the wreckage was the force that had refused to bow, refused to bluff humanity. On the bridge of the Eclipse, Captain Mara Hale stood still, her hands resting lightly against the polished edge of the command console. The mission was complete. The enemy had been defeated not by overwhelming numbers, but by unwavering will. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, gazed out at the silent stars as she listened to the final messages of surrender echoing across every channel. Yet there was no celebration on the ship, no cheers, no shouts of victory. Only silence, the heavy, solemn silence of a war that should never have begun. The surviving leaders of the Galactic Council gathered one last time, but the grand chambers of Solara Prime were hollow now. Many seats stood empty. The proud voices that once filled the hall were gone. Those who remained were weary, their faces lined with fear and regret. A communication link opened. A single human representative appeared. Calm and cold. "We did not come to conquer," the human envoy said, their voice steady and without anger. "We came to end the threat to our people. That threat is over." The Council's remaining High Chancellor, his voice trembling, nodded. We wish for peace. No more blood." But the words felt hollow now. The Council begged for peace only after the fires of war had burned too far. They had gambled and lost. The galaxy would never look the same again. Earth's terms were simple but final: an immediate end to all military expansion near human space, recognition of Earth's sovereignty, and binding agreements to prevent further aggression. There were no demands for territory, no calls for tribute. Humanity wanted only what they had, always sought freedom and safety. One by one, the Council's broken worlds signed the accords. The war ended not with fireworks, but with quiet signatures beneath digital screens. And though peace returned, it was a different peace. A fragile peace, born not from trust, but from the undeniable knowledge of what humanity truly was when pushed beyond the edge, back on Earth. There were no grand parades, no public celebrations. The cost had been too high. Families mourned their fallen. Cities repaired their scars. Humanity had won, but the victory felt cold, almost empty. They had shown the galaxy that they would not bluff, they would not break. But they had also shown the terrible strength that lived within them when forced to fight. Captain Mara Hale returned to her homeworld after the final surrender. She stood alone beneath the open sky, breathing the air of Earth, the same air that generations before her had fought to defend. She knew the galaxy would watch humanity differently now. Some with fear, some with respect, some with quiet hatred. But none would ever again mistake Earth's silence for weakness. The new order settled slowly over the stars. The Galactic Council, humbled and broken, turned its focus to rebuilding. Earth, scarred but standing, watched from the shadows of its own resolve, and across the cold black of space, the message remained: humanity does not bluff. Not now, not ever.